Hey, Parkway Hills Youth. We're here for week 4 of our family reunion series. And this week we're looking at global Christianity. And to help us out with that, I'm here with my friend Stefanie Mundenk. Hey, Stefanie.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. So, Stefanie, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're living now, and what you're doing.
So my name is Stefanie. As Jeff said, I just graduated from law school. I'll be moving to Kentucky shortly to become a public defender or a criminal defense attorney for people who can't afford to pay one. I grew up overseas. My parents are missionaries, which is why Jeff asked me to talk to you guys today.
Let everybody know, where did you grow up? Where did your parents serve?
Yeah, so I spent most of my life up until the time I was 17 in a country called Papua New Guinea. It's about 100 miles north of Australia and sort of borders with Indonesia.
And which has led to a lot of fun conversations with us over the years of our friendship. Before we can get to that, though, I've got to ask the obvious question when it comes up to this. Could you give us some examples of, in your experience, when missions goes well, and maybe something that hasn't gone so well, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think missions tend to, I might be biased, but I think my parents did it right, for lack of a better word. We grew up in a small village where nobody from the outside had ever been in it before. And for a couple years before my dad ever even mentioned Jesus or the Bible, we just lived there. And we went to their gardens with them. We formed community with them. We told them we were there to stay. And so I think that it's really important to sort of show people that you're willing to assimilate to their culture, that you want to know them, serve them, instead of trying to come in with sort of like a rigorous set of rules and be like, here's this thing that you should do, while you don't know anything about the way it applies to their daily life.
I like that. And so I take it that you would agree then the inverse of that is really where the negative is, where in the past there has been a tendency for some missionaries to import not just the gospel, but our own particular ways of the gospel and our own particular culture of maybe some things that aren't necessarily part of the gospel, but are things the way we live. Would you agree with that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that I saw many times over the course of the years that I lived there, several missionaries who kind of came and acted. It was as if, right, like they acted as if they knew that they had the key to life. They came in and stood on street corners and preached and handed out Bibles that weren't in people's languages. And, like they acted like they were there to spread the word, but that everyone should just listen to them because they knew things. And that's not enough in a country like Papua New Guinea. It's intensely relationship oriented. You can't speak into someone's life unless you have a relationship with them. And so I think people that were unsuccessful in reaching people over there ignored that aspect of the culture and sort of acted as if religion was like a prescription rather than a God intensely loves and cares about you, and here's how we can like live in community with him.
That's really interesting. Now, you mentioned assimilation, and so of course, though, the funny thing about your life as a white person who grew up in a majority non-white country is, in some ways, you were coming home to America, but in some ways, you kind of had to assimilate yourself.
Yeah.
I remember early in our friendship, just the number of times that I could make a pop culture reference and you would just stare at me, right? You really were Steve Rogers coming out of the ice in the
I wish I
Marvel
understood that
movies.
reference.
Yeah, exactly, right. But we really want to focus on the church. So what's something about church life in America that you just thought was so weird? That really stood out to you versus what you were used to with Christianity in your experience in Papua New Guinea?
Well, first of all, you wear shoes to church here in America.
See, I'm against that personally, but
As am I. But I think the best way I can describe it is that church in America, even still to me, sometimes feels like a concert or a performance
Mm,
where there's this group of people who are the in crowd that people have come to watch and observe. To whereas in Papua New Guinea, there isn't that dynamic. Church isn't a thing that people go to or do. It's a community experience. So when, for example, when whoever's talking, like doing the message or whatever there, like starts praying, everyone else in the congregation prays as well, but out loud. And so it's just like this community of people praying out loud all at the same time. And I think that's like maybe the most concrete example I can come up with of like church being a community experience and about like everyone like participating directly with God and not necessarily just being an observer.
mm. Yeah, that's really something to think about, just because, yeah, like my kids know I grew up in a church very similar to Parkway Hills in Southern Alabama, and we had like a big auditorium, bigger than the one that we have here. And there is
Mhm.
that sense of the microphone and either a
Yeah.
podium or a lectern or a pulpit, and kind of the center of that focus.
Yeah.
Um, Now, what's something, I think you're already kind of headed there, but what's something about life, about Christian life and Christianity in Papua New Guinea, that you think that we could learn from it in America, that my kids would do well to kind of consider as they grow up into Christianity?
I think that I had the opportunity to go to boarding school while I was in Papua New Guinea. And so in addition to like sort of growing up in the culture of Papua New Guinea, I also got the chance to experience a lot of different cultures via my friends that went to boarding school. And the thing that I think that I took away from it is that Christianity looks different everywhere. And I think that it should, right? Like, I think that it, in a sense, so maybe I can use an example of like what didn't go well. So I remember this specific instance when I was maybe 10 years old. And there was sort of like this whole like hubbub in the village because my dad had ended up talking with somebody, and it sort of came out that the culture over there is animistic. So they worship the spirits. And what my dad didn't realize is that by using the word Holy Spirit, people there completely misunderstood what Christianity was for years, because it sort of ended up coming out that they would pray to the Holy Spirit, and if he didn't bring rain or do what they wanted, they would go on to the next spirit and the next one.
Wow.
Um, and it was like just that fundamental miscommunication that we had, because my dad didn't grow up over there. That wasn't his life. And so it sort of created this dissent in the village. And we ended up, they asked us to leave because of it. We ended up coming back to the States because my dad essentially told them, like, it's all or nothing, right? Like, you can't believe in the Holy Spirit and these other spirits. It's one or the other. And they were like, well, why would we pick one instead of the other? And so it's, in a sense, I think my parents started out right, but I think that like we fell into one of the common pitfalls, which is sort of assuming that people knew what we meant. And it's sort of
Mm,
like when you see Bible translation, right? In Papua New Guinea, they've never seen a picture of a lion or a lamb. They don't know what those animals are. And so metaphors right, like you had Bible translators translating the Bible into these village languages, but using like Englishized words for lion and sheep. And the people in the village had no idea what they were talking about. And so like a good way of, I think the right way is the thing they had over there was pigs. And so, right, you didn't have a shepherd and sheep, you should have had a pig herder and a pig. And they would have understood that. And so I think all of that is to say that their Christianity doesn't look like lion and lamb. It doesn't look like Holy Spirit or not, right? Like, it's because of the way the culture is, you have to communicate in a different way. And I think that's true everywhere, right? Like, every culture has their own metaphors, and every culture reacts differently to things. So like, as I said, Papua New Guinea is like an intensely relational culture. If you ruin a relationship, you have no credibility whatsoever anymore. And so I think that like the thing to take away is that just because somebody else does Christianity differently doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. I think that Christianity, when applied to our lives, it might transform our lives, but it doesn't transform our lives into something recognizable. Christianity can't transform someone in Papua New Guinea from a pig herder to a shepherd, right? They don't know what that is. But so I think it's about understanding that everybody sort of comes away with different ideas of Christianity to like an extent, and that part of being a family is appreciating each other's differences instead of demanding that everyone conform to a set of rules or practices or a right way to do things. It was very long and
No,
complicated, but
that was great. And one of the things it reminded me of, and that I think figure you'll get a kick out of, and so hopefully my kids are watching this. A few years ago, I met a youth minister who told me about a trip that some missionaries that his church was supporting, and things weren't going well at first, as they would tell the story of Jesus, and everyone like, wow, this is beautiful, and this really does speak to me. And then came the punchline, like you reference directly biblical language, like translate like direct like biblical quotes. This is one of those examples of some of our extra biblical stuff that's not necessarily from the Bible, but it's not anti-biblical either, just ways that we talk about the Bible. They got to the end of the spiel about and here's who Jesus is, and they were connecting with it, and they would ask people to invite Jesus into their heart, and it just fell flat. And eventually they realized the reason why was because they were missing out on something endemic to the culture, which is for them their metaphysical center of the heart, the center of their body. Like for us, we talk about the heart as an organ, but we also talk about it as that metaphysical center of our being. Theirs was the emotions. Theirs was the throat.
In Papua New Guinea, it's the stomach. So you say invite Jesus into your heart, they have no idea what you're talking about. You say invite Jesus into your stomach, and boy, they're there with you.
Yeah, exactly. They started asking them if they wanted to invite Jesus into the throat, and the gospel broke out. Those are really good examples. I'm glad that you could relate to that so well. Anything else you want to like? Obviously, these are middle schoolers and high schoolers. They're probably not going to anytime soon get the same experience that you did in a boarding school in the global South. What's any advice you would leave them with about how to begin to kind of internalize those lessons here in Madison, Mississippi?
I think that it's important to recognize that if every culture does Christianity differently, every single person is going to have a different experience with God and is going to have different takeaways and apply that to their life in a different way. And so I guess from myself, what I noticed is that I was extremely judgmental. I thought that Papua New Guinean Christianity was the right way to do Christianity, and that Papua New Guinean culture was the right way to do culture. I think here we have the tendency to do the reverse. And so people like to declare all sorts of things as sinful or not Christian, right? You can't be a Christian and do this. You can't be a Christian and do that. We like to have our little buckets of Christianity, and like everything else is not okay. And what that looks like is really imposing our personal values on other people and just using Christianity as the mouthpiece to do it. So I think that what I wish I had learned younger is to suspend judgment, ask questions, try to understand people and sort of like what they see God as and how they see that applying to their lives. And then you might have the opportunity to make real connections with people and form real community with people who are very different from you, because you're not sort of creating these binary black and white categories of what a Christian does and doesn't do.
Thank you for that. I think that's something that we can really tackle, particularly this week, as we talk about in our Zoom call this week. We're going to be talking about historical Christianity and global Christianity, kind of both an example of, Christianity is a lot bigger than any of us, and any particular little bucket, as you put it. And then next week, we're going to be moving on to race and Christianity in America. So Stefanie, thank you so much for your time. Good luck on the bar exam. We'll be praying for you, and Again, thank you so much for your time. Parkway Hills Youth, make sure you watch the second part of this video as well. And be sure to join us Sunday night at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Bye, y'all.
Thanks for having me.